Okay, you're all set to begin.
Thank you. All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 16th Committee to Review and Assess Zoning and Review the Town's Use of Regulatory Ad Hoc Committee meeting. Before we start with roll call, I just want to mention Cynthia Lovell, Committee Administrator, unfortunately tested positive for COVID, won't be joining us today, but she's going to be watching from home. So we wish her well and hope she's not hit too hard by that. So I will go ahead and start with the roll call. Catherine Ledeck.
Here.
Ken Alsman.
Here.
Jeffrey Mendez. John Crow. Matthew Levesque. Kristen Turkelson.
Here.
Charles Bloom. Here. And Bob Schulte here. Let's start with the Mass General Statement here. In accordance with MGL Chapter 30A, Section 20, I must inquire whether anyone is recording this meeting, and if so, to please make your presence known. Nobody? We're good, thank you. I'd like to read the purpose of our committee, which is, again, work with the town's planning and development staff to review and reassess recently adopted zoning changes, review the town's use of regulatory agreements, and make recommendations to the council. Just a quick introduction. I want to thank everyone again, both here in person or on Zoom, for their interest in this committee and its work. Once again, we encourage the public to provide input and comments either in person, via Zoom, or by sending their comments via email. Emails can be sent to Cynthia Lovell. Her email address is cyn.lovell@town.barnstable.ma.us. And please put in the subject ad hoc regulatory agreement and zoning committee in the subject line. Cynthia will forward copies of all emails sent to the committee to all of the committee members. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We want to welcome Seth Etienne, the newest member of the committee. He was approved last night by the town council. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get sworn in time for today's meeting, but he will be for our next meeting, which is going to be next Friday, the 23rd. So welcome to Seth. We look forward to you joining the committee. And while he's sitting in the front row, I just want to congratulate Jim Kupfer. Last night he was appointed as the Director of Planning and Development. So got to get up. Needs to get all new business cards or a little white out to get that interim off your card. So, with that, I think I want to mention we had some public correspondence sent to the committee. We had numerous letters from citizens, particularly with expressing concerns about the town's solar zoning, section 240-44-2. Most of their concerns have focused on health and safety concerns about solar farms being allowed on or near residentially zoned properties. I think that as we get into the topic of zoning, I think that's an area that we'll want to discuss a little bit further and see what, if any, recommendations we might want to make to the town council to look into that. But look forward to maybe getting some more understanding of that issue from Jim and his team so we can get our arms around that issue. Also received an email from Cynthia from Andy Packer. Mr. Packer had a question or a concern about zoning laws that will make it easier to clear-cut land and build industrial-sized solar farms. So I apologize, his letter was also regarding concerns about the solar issue. So again, I think this is an area we should add to our list of concerns to be discussed once we really get into the zoning topic. With that, I think we will open it up to public comment. Just a reminder that once public comment is complete, the Zoom will be shut off, so we don't have to keep an additional staff person waiting for the rest of the meeting. Just a reminder, generally public comment is 3 minutes, but we don't have a lot of folks in public here in public, so we have a little latitude, but I do ask people to be respectful of the time and committee and the other members of the public. So with that, I will open it up to public comment for anyone in the room if they'd like to speak. Welcome, Mr. Moran.
Where do you want me to be, at the table or here?
One at the podium is great.
Okay. I'm Larry Moran from Katuitt. Still have.
Want to get the mic on, I think?
Yep, it's on.
Oh,
I'm Larry Moran from Katuitt. I still live there. Haven't been evicted yet. I'm here because of Bob, not because of but Bob is doing an incredible job, not getting this committee going, but maintaining its momentum. So I think you should be recognized for that.
thank you, Mr. Moran.
My approach to 168 is that I made a copy of it. I've looked at it before, but suddenly I'm starting to see some things about it that I'd like to be able to contribute at some point in time. I'm not ready to now. Except I noted, there's a lot of feedback here. Except I see there's an overlap between many different entities within the town. The only thing I'm going to suggest at this point is that the concept of communications and secrecy be brought under control. By that I mean, if there's communications between, say, planning and the Cape Cod Commission, let's make it public. Let's not hide behind it. There may be some resistance to that. I'm used to resistance. So what I want to do is let that be something that you consider. Otherwise, Bob, I'm going to come back after the fact and start feeding information to you, and I'll try to attend. I'll be here next Friday also.
Okay,
Thanks, Bob.
thank you, Mr. Moran. Anybody else in the audience? Mr. Schwab, thank you.
Thank you, Eric Schwab, West Hyannis. I just wanted to call folks' attention to a LCP meeting next week on August 22nd at 5:30, where the town's future land use map will be released. Nope, no Jim shaking his head. Beginning the discussion. Because I imagine at some point it's going to dovetail into the concept of zoning. There's been quite a bit of discussion at the Cape Cod Commission about the need to expand or make room for multifamily housing. And I think we should all participate in that discussion because I think it's going to impact your recommendations at some point. If suddenly someone decides they want multifamily housing, following the sewers out to Marston's Mills, and that's reflected in the land use maps published by the planning department and sanctioned by the LCP, then that's going to become problematic for people. Last year during the elections, there was concern that the sewers going out to Lake Wequawka were going to result in condo development on the shores of the lake. I mean, it was a topic that was actively discussed. So I do think we need to be aware of these land use maps and, if necessary, comment on them at your committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. I think that got on our radar screen. I was going to mention that later on. Jim had suggested, and I think it's a good idea, perhaps arranging a joint meeting with either representatives from the LCP and maybe the housing and this committee. So some of these issues do overlap, and I think that's something we want to take a closer look at. Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Sarah, do we have anyone on Zoom?
There's no Zoom public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask the committee members if they have any response to the public comment or written correspondence you received today. Councilor Trickelson?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, Jim, if you could bring the committee up to speed about where the permitting process is for the Wakeby Road project.
Yes, the Wakeby Road project at 810 Wakeby Road received a special permit from the planning board per the zoning ordinance. And my understanding is a building permit application has been made as of 8/14. That building permit, my understanding is under review, though. There's not a lot of information there. I took a peek at it prior to the meeting just to see what has been filed, but it hasn't moved forward as of yet. There's a lot of, if you take a look at the zoning ordinance, and it sounds like we'll probably get into those discussions in future meetings, there's a lot of information that has to be provided by the applicant, and to my knowledge, that hasn't been provided just yet. So it's still at early application to the building department.
Any other comments or thoughts? Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank the members of the community that provided public comments on solar. That's exactly the kind of comments that we're looking for. Detailed discussion about what concerns people have, whether good or bad, so that when we do get in deep into the zoning ordinance, that we have a better handle on what we need to look at. Because to some extent, the details are what really matter, and many times it's members of the public who are interacting directly with aspects of the zoning ordinance where they have, you know, good or bad experiences. If they bring that information forward to us, then we can act on it and look and review what's going on. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, and thanks also to the folks who are here today and anybody who's listening on Zoom.
Thank you, Kathy. Any other comments? Okay, I think we'll move to item D.
Sorry, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
It's gonna close. Now that public comment's over, that the Zoom is gonna close.
Okay. Just a reminder again that after another public comment is complete, the Zoom will be closed, so there'll be no further access to the public via Zoom. With that, I think we'll move to item D, which was to continue our review and discussion of Chapter 68 and some of the additional items. I think before we get into that, I wanted to ask Committee Member Alsman. He had submitted a memo dated July 22nd to the committee with some of his thoughts based on his experience in this area regarding the regulatory agreements, and see if you had anything you want to comment or summarize or points you want to make to the committee and the
Just a
public.
couple comments, if I might. I guess my take on this was that there is sort of a feeling that we need to have a better first impression of what we're really trying to do, particularly with areas like the downtown of Hyannis. We've established a pretty good set of regulations and policy on downtown, and I'm not all that sure. I wasn't sure when I first read through what was provided to me about there, that it was presented in a very positive way. That, you know, this is an aspiration the community has to really improve the downtown for everybody involved, and it's going to take a lot of builders along the way to make that happen. So the first idea was let's take a look at the documentation we have and we provide to people, including newcomers like me, who are trying to figure out what the goals of the community are, and present them in a, frankly, a more positive view rather than a regulatory view. We need the regulation. I'm not talking about dissipating any of the regulatory rules, but that it's important that we give the image first. My background has a lot to do with sort of the visual images of places and that first impression you have. And so that was an effort to try to set up that as a goal. And also part of that is what I've referred to as proactive and reactive. Instead of waiting for someone to come in and say, I want to do that over there, and you go, oh, I'm not sure that's really what we want. If we were more proactive in saying, oh, that's our image, let's physically sort of outline what it is we want in that block or in that area, that would be helpful to everybody to say, oh, well, I can do that. That'll work out pretty well. And so if we're more proactive in presenting the ideas of what we want, and it's not, I'm not talking about doing detailed plans. I'm just, you know, it just seems to me that we could sketch out ideas and, have sort of, again, communicate a more positive way of what we're trying to accomplish. And in its simplest form, that's really all I was trying to say.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with the committee, and given your background and experience, it's very valuable to hear that. So, and I guess I'd like to comment, I think in the last couple of meetings, I've heard from Jim and Chair of the Planning Department, Steve Robichaud, a lot of those same thoughts, giving a little bit more advance notice on some of the projects so the public's aware of it, trying to be a little bit more proactive than reactive. And I know that I'm really excited about Jim taking over the role as the Director of Planning and Development. Looking forward to some of his new ideas and, maybe a breath of fresh air. So I think, and he's participating in this committee, he's hearing all these things firsthand. So I'm excited about that. Hopefully we can put our heads together and bring a lot of those ideas to the table, so. I think with that, we'll ask, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you very much, Bob. Ken, your comments are spot on. In my opinion, many of the documents that we have here really don't do a good job at presenting a positive image of what we really want here in the town. I just want to bring to your attention the importance of the comprehensive plan and this meeting that's coming up in doing that. That's really the purpose of the comprehensive plan, is to provide those kinds of images and sketches and sort of vision for what we want for a certain area. And as everybody knows, we're in the middle of reworking the comprehensive plan. So the extent to which you can get engaged and involved in that effort, and everybody else on the committee to do the same, I'm completely behind you in doing that. That's really where the vision elements stand. But the regulatory documents, the zoning ordinance, also should describe that to some degree. Don't you think?
I don't want to confuse the regulatory with the image, the physical image of something. It's almost like trying to describe why photography works rather than just looking at the picture. And what makes it work is for many people, it's just too technical to begin with. And you get lost in what are the values we're trying to create? What's our feeling when we see what this looks like? And so to the degree that we can say, okay, this is the block we're looking at, and here's a sense of what it is we want to do. And then let's talk about it. So.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? Okay. I guess I'd like to ask Jim, maybe as follow-up, you had sent us an updated version of the memo with updates as of August 7th, just to maybe walk through some of those changes. I know I had a couple of follow-up questions with that, and maybe some others do as well. Oh. Sarah, we have another member of the public that's come. I know Zoom has been shut off, but since they're in person, no problem adding, reopening public comment? Or,
Yeah, I would restart.
what's that? Okay. Okay. We have another member of the public who would like to comment, and I'd like to reopen public comment to allow her to come speak. Thank you. Please introduce yourself and tell us your village. Is the green light on the mic there? The button at the bottom of the mic, there should be a green light.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ann Salas, Marston's Mills. The recent solar zoning overlay on the 20-acre residentially zoned 810 Wakeby Road in Marston's Mills puts my community on the front lines of all the dangers of an industrial-scale electric power plant with substations 140 feet from our homes, families, and children. 830 Wakeby, which abuts 810, was recently purchased by the town to protect the Hayden well field, an active source of water for more than 30,000 people. The solar overlay allows the construction of a 5-megawatt power plant that will threaten our lives and our homes. It will devalue our properties. With 2 other 5-megawatt plants existing now, 2.5 miles to the west and 3 miles east of 810, we have to ask, how needed is this particular power plant, considering our housing crisis on this residentially zoned land? Deafening 71 decibel transformers and inverters, the effects of close proximity to massive electromagnetic radiation, the fire department's mandatory let it burn policy with the aquifer directly beneath these structures. These fires are fast and furious. They feed on themselves and are notoriously difficult to extinguish, even with chemical foam, often taking days. There will be little access for firefighters to protect our homes. All concessions to the solar developer, TJA Clean Energy, LLC, were granted under duress of the lawsuit they filed against the town of Barnstable. Having achieved all their goals, the case was dismissed with prejudice at Mass Land Court. There can be no further litigation on this matter. This presents an opportunity to take back some control of our town. Construction has not begun at 810. Removing the solar overlay district will put an end to this dangerous threat to our drinking water, families, and homes. At the same time, amend the solar bylaws to prohibit industrial-scale solar installations in all residential zones. Countless communities across the U.S. have done this with success. Barnstable has already overly fulfilled its quota for renewable energy as determined by the SJC regarding Tracer Lane 2 Realty versus the City of Waltham in April 2022. But to protect the people of the town of Barnstable further, I propose this amendment to Barnstable's E-Code Section 240-44.2 as follows. D, as of right siting, all residentially zoned siting is prohibited. The solar photovoltaic overlay district is prohibited on residentially zoned land. To not do so is a clear violation of MGL Chapter 48, Section 3, Paragraph 9, to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. If a total prohibition is impossible, a 650-foot setback from residential properties should be required and never subject to variances. The National Cancer Institute's 33-year study concludes that there is a 70% greater risk of leukemia and central nervous system cancers in people living within 650 feet of power lines. Our homes will be within 140 feet of a power plant if TGA Solar's project is built at 810 Wakeby Road. During 4 years of this ordeal, this LLC never fulfilled most of the requirements of the special permit in E-Code 240-44.2. They issued a 2-page letter of assurance instead of a list of hazardous materials. They claimed there are no hazardous materials in solar panels, though they are globally considered hazardous waste, and they are already a big problem globally. During decommissioning, this will definitely affect our water system, our water resources. TGA presented pure disinformation, incomplete, and misleading. Data for 6 different transformers was presented, fine print noting each transformer produced 68 to 71 decibels, measured 33 feet distance from those machines. The EPA states 1 hour exposure to 70 decibels is deafening. With 48 transformers in the original plan and in the decommissioning plan, TGA then claimed there were only 4, then 3, and then finally just 2 transformers. So who really knows? Some of them are within 100 feet of residential homes, not property lines, putting those homeowners at greater risk for hearing loss as well as fire. The homeowners at the Wakeby Road entrance have no setback at all, presumably because this 94-foot entrance is the sole access to 810, another great concern for first responder access, and because the required 100-foot setback for the water conservation land abutting one side of the entrance and the required 175 feet for the home on the other couldn't be achieved within 94 feet. We urge you to recommend the Town Council to amend our solar zoning bylaws and remove the solar overlay zoning at 810 Wakeby Road to protect our drinking water and the health, safety, and welfare of Barnstable's taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? No? Ms. Ellis, I'm sorry, I didn't notice you come in. No, I just didn't notice you come in the room, so I'm not sure what you caught in the discussion, but we mentioned that we received numerous letters on this, and the committee has identified this as something that we definitely want to talk about more as we get into the zoning. Committee member Ledeck mentioned really appreciative of the detailed information that you provided with constructive thoughts and input on that. So we'll be considering that as we go forward. So.
Thank you very much. If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. I think Councilor Bloom has a comment.
just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it. A person's home is their castle, especially if they've paid dearly for it. And to have bad actors move into your neighborhood and destroy the quality of your life, I mean, at some point, we have to say no to these people. I'm a little bit familiar with the history of what's gone on there. There's been illegal dumping. How much do you folks, how much can you take? And then on top of it, you're going to have what seems to be just a horrible noise constantly buzzing in the background. If the new town council, the new makeup of the town council should do anything, it should be to bring the public more into the decision-making on these things. I've seen committee meetings where people have been shot down. And is discouraging. Folks like you show up to meetings, you don't know Robert's Rules of Orders or whatever. You're just there to try and say something. And the if you don't speak in the and play the game, you get shot down by committee members, often angrily. And you pay everybody's salary here, and people should listen to you.
Thank you, Councilor Bloom. I think
agree.
you can tell you've got our attention. And we will certainly, as we go forward and discuss this, make sure the concerns of you and your neighbors are elevated to consideration by the town council.
That would be wonderful. As I understand it, the town council could remove that overlay and relieve us of all of this agony, 4 years of agony. It would be lovely if they could. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Nicholson, go ahead.
Kate, do you think you could speak to explain to this committee if there was an opportunity to remove the solar overlay, how that would happen? I guess I just want to say one more thing. My reason for asking is, having spent some time trying to understand how this project even got to where it was, is, my heart goes out to the residents who live around that. And you can imagine if you were a resident and all of a sudden there was a little piece of land by and all of a sudden something industrial popped up in your neighborhood, you wouldn't be happy. So my heart goes out to those neighborhoods where this kind of stuff happens. And I just want us to be realistic and myself to be realistic in my position, to have an understanding of what is possible and what is not possible. And if, there's other questions we need to ask or understand that we're asking those, because again, as Charlie says, if the town council wants to take that up, we need to be realistic in our empathy and our concern for the residents and for potential other residents in other areas that could be impacted by such projects. So that's my reason for asking. Thank you.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, to the previous speaker, Councilor Turkelson. Kate Connolly, Assistant Town Attorney. There is a process for amending zoning ordinances and zoning maps, and that would include an overlay district that has been adopted. And that is under Chapter 48, Section 5. Someone would have to draft a petition to change the ordinance, change the zoning ordinance and the accompanying map, and it would have to go before the planning board for a hearing. There is a prohibition against bringing something back within 2 years if it's been voted already. So that's something that would have to be considered. And I'm not speaking to the specific location here. I do generally know what we're talking about, but I wasn't involved in the litigation. Changing a property that's already been permitted, that's a little bit different, even if the ordinance were changed and the map was changed to get rid of an overlay district. If something's already been allowed, then it's grandfathered. I don't believe the particular project at issue here has received all permits that are necessary. I hope that answers your question. If there's more specifics you want me to look into, I'm happy to do that. And I am well aware that I read all of the comments that we got from people with respect to solar. And legal and the planning department has already talked a little bit about some of the things that we need to consider changing in our ordinance ever since that Tracer Lane case came down, which was regarding a solar. The court made some kind of specific definitions, although it was fact specific to that case. We began the discussions internally about things like battery storage, what we can prohibit, what we can't with respect to solar. So it is something that we're looking at.
Well, I mean, I guess I would like to have as much information as we could, considering that the project has come forward, just in the last few days. I think time is kind of the essence, that if there's something that can be done, that wants to be done, that we have that information now. And I guess that's why I'm asking the question. So if you could provide this committee, that information so that we have the details. It's been brought to our attention. I can only speak for myself, and it sounds like Charlie is on board. I don't want to speak for others, but and the town council, it is kind of like we need to have the roadmap of how that works and the details specific, so that, again, we're realistic in what we can and can't do, and that we're not spinning our wheels needlessly if there's things that can't be done. And I think we all just need an education in that, in a transparent way, so that everybody here and everybody in the community knows how things happen.
Certainly, and I might, not to put Jim on the spot, but I might defer to Jim a little bit more with respect to the specific project that we're talking about, because I'm not entirely up to speed on how far they are along with their permitting. I am aware of the litigation and how that was resolved and why it was resolved that way, which was the Tracer Lane case. But I'm not sure how far along this particular applicant is. So we can certainly look into that and talk further.
Thank you, Attorney Connolly. Councilor Nicholson and Councilor LeBoom, I just want to remind, as part of this committee, our recommendations are going to come out a little further down the road if this is a situation that may require a little bit more proactive. It may be something, and I don't know the process, who can bring that kind of a petition, whether that's a citizen or a counselor, but perhaps maybe a conversation with Ms. Salas and you guys to get a little bit more information. I just don't know what the process is. My only concern was, as our recommendation won't come forward in a while, if this is something that's time sensitive, maybe there might want to be some activity from others sooner rather than later. So.
And Kate, is that petition driven by residents, like sort of like the petition they had for the meeting regarding the wind farm stuff? Is it that kind of a petition? I guess more information on that would be helpful.
I believe we've already done that within the past 4 years. I don't know about the Tracer Lane decision regarding our situation, although I believe that the speculation amongst legal people is that that decision did give municipalities greater power to decide these things, siting of industrial solar. But it didn't seem to interfere with, that didn't have the effect on our situation because everything was passed. And I believe it was because of the lawsuit and the expediency, shall we call it, of just giving them what they wanted. So that's what happened. And since the case was dismissed with prejudice, well, I feel like that leaves us open legally to change our minds, to do what's actually right. And since, when this started in 2019, the planning board's initial decision was not to recommend it to town council. And then a little time went by and TGA filed the lawsuit at Mass Land Court. So I'll certainly be we'll look into the petition. Time is of the essence. I sent my communication to you on Monday. On Tuesday, the 14th, apparently, TJ did file an application for the building permit. I sent Jim a communication earlier today asking whether they had submitted with the utility, an agreement with the utility, and which is necessary for a permit. They did not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Ellis, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask, maybe you could follow up with Jim
Yes.
after the meeting, if you can stay by. Just want to make sure we can move forward. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any other? Oops. Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll ask Jim to come back up, and we'll pick up with the memo. Thank you again, Ms. Ellis.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Jim Cupford, Director of Planning. In your package, I believe you have a 3-page memo that we began reviewing at the last meeting. And what I have done, along with, in collaboration with the chairman from the Planning Board, is provide track changes based on the conversation we had at the last meeting. So those track changes are in red, I believe, but hopefully you have colored version. And if you like, Mr. Chairman, I can just go down the track changes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Excellent. So in the first section, we're referring to map amendments. So I think...
Let me just make sure everybody
Yep.
is caught up. Do you have the memo? It's Town of Barnstable is in the packet, I believe Cynthia gave us. Looks like this. Yeah. I think we're set. Ken, you good? It was in the packet that was left on the desk there, yeah. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Yep.
Thank you.
Not a problem. So in this memo, we attempt to provide track changes for to meet the requests of the committee from the last meeting. And so on the first page, in the first section, we talk about map amendments. And I think we went through each of the map amendments that have been done since the establishment of the regulatory agreement district. And there was some interest in maybe revising that district and maybe even deleting some of those areas that were added to the district. So as part of that, the request was to determine the process for doing such. And so I've added just briefly in these track changes, so it would require a public hearing at Town Council. And then I did confirm with the Cape Cod Commission that at minimum, a notification to the commission is required. They determine whether or not a hearing is also required for that amendment. I will note that every amendment that has taken place to this district to date did not require an amendment. So one would assume that the removal of that addition would also not require a hearing, but that is ultimately determined by the commission. So this minimum notification to the commission after a public hearing to the town council is required. Moving on to earlier public involvement, and I've added in the heading and final reporting. So this really tries to touch on the discussion of just more input both beforehand, before the ball gets rolling, for the public, for the council, for the planning board, and then providing some assurances that it gets done correctly and per the plan reviewed and approved. So we've added and final reporting, and we state towards the end of this section, additionally, the committee suggested a final reporting out process may benefit benefit both the town council and the process. Some on the committee recommended adding a requirement for applicants to be required to provide a formal presentation or a report to the council as a condition of final approvals. And in talking with the chairman of the planning board, we had formal presentation or report because as the conversation went on at the last meeting, I think we focus in on that not every project is the same, and some can be very small or some can be large. So maybe a formal presentation isn't necessary. But so we left that as an or report, and it would be up to the council to make that determination. So that's how we phrased it there. Certainly open to edits. Moving to just beyond there, same section, but into recommendations. Adding just simply a line that says, lastly, all regulatory agreements shall be conditioned to provide a final report / presentation to town council prior to final approvals. And then lastly, in the section regarding enforcement, we have essentially two topics here. One is enforcing the agreement as written and furthering the aspect of a holdback or a security of some kind, and making sure that there's a minimum holdback until all aspects of the agreement are completed. So just adding a little further detail there. But then additionally, in the second aspect of enforcement, we talk about enforcement officers potentially. So additionally, the committee suggested the town investigate whether dedicated enforcement officers may improve compliance and may be utilized for enforcement beyond just regulatory agreements. The committee suggested that if officers are considered, they may need to be staggered in hours and geography, so compliance is enforced in off hours and across town. And then we've added in the potential recommendation section, the committee also recommends the council direct the town to explore adding additional enforcement officers for regulatory and zoning compliance.
Thanks, Jim. Any comments from the committee members? Committee member Hladek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've just been thinking about these regulatory agreements and the maps and the two areas that were added after, the growth incentive. The regulatory agreements were established to support the growth incentive zone. That's pretty specific geographic area, and the two other areas are kind of not really that close by. So I'm just sort of maybe this is a question for the attorney. I'm just, and of course I wasn't involved in the establishment of either of those. So I'm just wondering if regulatory agreements outside of the growth incentive zone actually have legal standing. I don't expect you to have a perfect answer. It's just a question that I think needs to be raised.
Well, again, regulatory agreements are not a zoning thing, so I don't really think, it's a very good question, because if we've got a zoning district where they're supposed to go, that's where they need to go. But they're not a zoning thing, they're contracts, and any appeal of anyone would have to be dealt with as a contract action. But the town has the authority to develop zoning districts and to put certain requirements, including reg agreements, just within those districts.
Okay.
So I can see a successful challenge being made if we try to use one outside of the district. But again, if a developer agrees to it, and if it's in the best interest of the town, we could enter into a reg agreement that's outside of the district. Maybe call it something else, but we could enter into a contract with the developer. But I think the goal here, and again, I'll defer to Jim as Director of Planning, I think the goal was that we don't want to use them as waivers of zoning. We don't want to use them just to let people out of zoning, so we wanted to make a district where they could be allowed. And therefore, it's not likely that the town would want to just allow them anywhere other than that district.
Okay. Thank you very much. I guess my interest is in making sure that, so the regulatory agreements benefit the developers, but they also benefit the community. There's community benefits that are specifically identified. And I would want to make sure that any regulatory agreements that we enter into outside of the growth incentive zone have good community benefits that are measurable and quantifiable, so that, you know, we can actually see those benefits coming due to the community, rather than it being just something up there in the ether that we don't have anything to measure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you, Kathy, for that. I think just thinking through some of your comments, I agree that perhaps some of the areas, for example, like the Centerville district and maybe the 35 Scudder, some of the areas that are outside what was formerly the growth incentive zone, those were passed in the 2007, 2009, I'm not sure the exact dates, but long enough ago, there's been no development. I guess it's a question I might think the town council would be interested in saying, what's the community benefit as we talk about what could be added or deleted from the maps. Maybe that's an area we suggest that they want to take another look at. I know a lot of people who live on Main Street in Centerville. I live in Centerville, business owners. I know in speaking to them, they're not looking forward to any further development of Main Street. So intuitively, it says to me, why would we want to have a regulatory agreement in the heart of the village? So I don't know the answer to the question. I just raise it as something maybe we want to be thinking about. Any other comments? I had a couple, but see if anybody else from the committee. Jim, thank you. One of my questions was going to be the notification, whether it was simply a notification, but you clarified that it's up to the Cape Cod Commission whether they want to have a hearing, but history has been that they have not required a hearing. But
That's correct.
we don't know what happens until something like that happens. Okay. A couple other comments. Under the enforcement, the paragraph starting with additionally, the committee suggested talking about adding enforcement officers. I think just point out for the committee, I think we kind of are mixing a little bit the subject. The second sentence, the committee suggested that if officers are considered, they may need to be staggered in hours and geography, so compliance is enforced on and off hours and across town. I think when that conversation was taking place, a couple of the committee members were focused more on general zoning enforcement. I don't see that really being necessary for enforcement of regulatory agreements. That's the kind of thing that's going to be done during business hours, I would think. But it's something to consider going forward when, if we do look at recommended additional enforcement officers, both for the regulatory agreement as well as general zoning. And then there's two other things I think we talked about that I didn't see mentioned here. One was Committee Member Ledeck mentioned conservation bonds, and again, that was an area I wasn't particularly familiar with. I'm not sure. I'll toss that back to Committee Member Ledeck if there's anything she wanted to have reflected in this memo that talks about that. We addressed the performance bonds and maybe minimum holdbacks. Maybe clarify a little bit more your thoughts on the conservation bonds.
So I've seen both, actually, performance bonds and conservation bonds at the same time. So it depends on the size of the project. If you have a massive project where they're doing enormous landscaping improvements and stormwater management improvements, you know, that's a situation where you'd probably want to consider a conservation bond. We're talking about impacts to the exterior of the property. So exterior of the building. We're not talking about improvements to the building. We're talking about improvements to the landscaping around the property. So it depends on the size of the project as to whether something like that would be important to consider. I think the idea of considering a performance bond, since it's something that we've not done in the past, I think that's a huge step forward. And if there's a need for us, or we see more going forward, you know, there's the various ordinances that will be reviewed have an opportunity to be improved or enhanced as time goes by. I don't think it's required.
Yeah. Councilor Turkelson.
In your experience, Kathy, who would bring forward or be responsible for the conservation bond as far as requiring it or monitoring it? Would that be the Conservation Commission here? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, I like the idea, I just don't know enough of the details to understand how that gets implemented. I understand in scale what you're talking about. I can kind of close my eyes and get a vision of what you're talking about, the importance of it. How, just a little bit more detail on how it gets from this idea in my head to reality.
So again, it depends on the size of the project, but for the most part, it's the same enforcement team that's enforcing the stormwater regulations, the same enforcement team that's confirming whether or not all of the landscaping elements have been handled correctly and adequately. And there's a time involved. So, you know, when a project is completed, you don't release the bond right away. You release the bond, a year later or 2 years later or even 3 years later when you have an opportunity to verify that the elements that you're monitoring are in fact delivered. So it's the same enforcement team. So the same questions come up. Who's going to be doing the enforcement? It's the same enforcement teams that are enforcing the regular zoning regulations right now.
Attorney Connolly.
How's that? Okay, thank you. Again, Kate Connolly, Assistant Town Attorney. Performance bonds are a wonderful mechanism for getting developers to do what they say that they're going to do. My only caution is that conservation bonds, you've got to be careful, and that was a good question, who would enforce it? Because if it's the Conservation Commission, they don't have a statutorily authorized provision to do enforcement bonds, and I know a lot of times commissions do them, but what I always advise is, under the subdivision control law, Chapter 41, Section 81B, and other provisions of that statute, subdivision control gives planning boards the authority to impose performance bonds. So it's allowed by statute. The Conservation Commission Act, which is Chapter 40, Section 8C. They also have the Wetlands Protection Act that they operate under, but that's a separate statute. 48C gives them their powers and duties, and it does not say anything about performance bonds. So I've always cautioned commissions, if you're going to do that, the best way to do it is to do it by agreement with the developer. If the developer agrees to it, it's like with a conservation restriction. You can't order that because that's a use of land or an agreement not to use land in a certain way. So a Conservation Commission can't order it. But if there are, and you mentioned stormwater regulations and things like that, those are things that the planning board could put in their decision and have the performance bond be enforced by the planning board. If it's going to go through conservation, I would caution that they might get challenged, so get the developer to agree to it. And they often do, and that'd be the stronger way to go. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think it's important to note, this is a wording issue. Conservation bond versus performance bond, they're really the same thing, but when we think about conservation bonds, we automatically think about the Conservation Commission. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
There are elements of a development project that have conservation-related impacts. That's different. Trees, stormwater management, all sorts of landscaping. Those are conservation-related actions that a developer is responsible for. So I really think of them as the same thing, where a conservation bond would be a subset, perhaps, of an overarching performance bond. What's pulling you away is the word conservation. I don't want you to think about it in that way. I want you to think about it as a performance bond. There are conservation-related actions that a developer has to complete for a project to be really completed that they can walk away from. Does that help you?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I guess I'm wondering about actually boots on the ground. So would it be in your department, Jim, that would say, we want 75 trees and we want these plantings and these things, and I guess I'm just envisioning who does that work? I've never really thought about it before.
Absolutely. So when the performance bond is established, there is an agreement that takes place, and it would likely refer to, say, the plan of record. And so that plan of record would have 17 trees that need to be planted, and we literally send out someone and they count the trees and they make sure that they're in the spot, and then they send me a letter back. Actually, we did one just today, and so a letter comes back to me that says, I've been out for an inspection, X, Y, and Z has been done, X, Y, and Z is missing, and then we take that letter, hand it back off to the developer and say, you're still missing these items. Please let us know when those are complete. So that's how it would operate.
And does having a conservation bond as part of the process, as opposed to a performance bond, actually provide a higher level of provision of items such as plantings and trees and stormwater management that we have been maybe ignoring in some of our bigger projects? I guess I'm wondering the benefit of having a separate section as conservation versus performance, because they sound similar, but they sound different.
They are similar, but it depends on the size of the project again. If you're not working with an enormous project that, I'm just making this up, that covers 25 acres of land and however many hundreds of trees that are going to go in, it's all about the wording. So in the performance bond, you could create a section of the the criteria that a developer would need to adhere to in order to get the bond released that describes conservation-related actions that they would have to complete. And it could be more detailed if it's a larger project because the complexity of the stormwater management is more complicated, or there's a section of the project that they needed to complete that required some type of, I'm just making this up as I go, conservation land, and you have to verify that that's protected, and maybe they were required to put an easement on it. You could verify that the easement was filed. It sort of depends on how you word it. It can be worded in a very detailed way, which would be really helpful in my mind for an enforcement officer. The more details, the better. But it's in my opinion, it's more than just verifying that the trees have been planted. It's verifying that they're alive and thriving. So you want to make sure that the language reflects that, so that when the enforcement officers are going out to do their inspection, they really know what they're looking for. So it's about the level of detail that can be provided. And yeah, it can in fact improve what we're doing. No question about it, yeah.
Maybe I'd suggest, or at least consider, for purposes of the memo were suggestions to the town council, we just say performance/conservation bonds, or performance to possibly include conservation bonds, to at least get the council to be discussing that. Sounds like, some of it's semantics and how it's defined, but it's kind of the same beast, just a little bit different side of the coin there. But just kind of bring up that subject, maybe we could do that, Jim.
Absolutely.
The only other thing that I had that I know we've talked a little bit about, and it's not really reflected here, and I'm not quite sure how to suggest it is or isn't, but we talked a little bit about timing and how timing is used in some of the regulatory agreements. Are the conditions that are specified in a regulatory agreement good for 10 years, and after 10 years the developer can do whatever they want? Just how that works. Is the 10 years they have X amount of time to complete the items? Just maybe a little bit more clarity, something to think about. The way I'm looking at this, and I'll ask the other committee members here, I'm viewing this memo that Steve and Jim and Steve have put together as kind of the format that we'll ultimately put together from the committee to provide to the council for our suggestions and thoughts on the regulatory agreement. So this is not quite done. We're going to do a few more things, but I think we've made a lot of progress in developing the thoughts we want to communicate. But I guess I would suggest, Jim, maybe just a little bit more thought. I'm not sure quite how, but maybe we can think about timing and how we reflect that. Any other thoughts or questions from anybody on the memo from Jim? Okay. I think the next item I had on my list, we talked about it last time, Jim, I think you and Steve were going to chat and come back to us some thoughts. There were some ideas about whether we ask a few representative developers to attend, or we have a meeting that was a joint meeting with perhaps the LCP reps and the housing and have some developers there. Don't know if you had any thoughts on that or recommendations on how we might proceed. I know our next meeting is the 23rd. That might be short notice to get anybody in and get the other groups together, but curious to see what you have on the way of thoughts for us on those.
Absolutely, yeah. So in your package, you should have a two-pager that just outlines all the regulatory agreements and now by year to try and give a little more understanding of time period and a brief description of what those agreements are for. And then you'll see towards the later years, the more recent ones, I've identified some the developers of the regulatory agreements. With that being said, the developers that are listed, some play a more active role than others in the regulatory agreement process. A thought that I did have in chatting with the planning board chair was perhaps reaching out to those attorneys and engineers that play a more, in my opinion, integral role in the regulatory agreement process. They're the ones speaking to the planning board, speaking to the council, the ones reviewing the ordinance, reviewing how their project relates to the ordinance and how they are or how they were reacting to the process. So, there are a number of developers. I'm happy to reach out to any of them that are listed here that you would like me to. And then also, I'm happy to reach out to a number of the attorneys and/or engineers that played a role, in that time period as well. You're correct. I think next Friday might be short notice, but I'm certainly happy to make the ask, or we can do it for your September meeting, whichever works best.
I'm thinking it probably makes sense to do in September, but I guess I'd go back to the committee members and their thoughts. My thought is we don't want to invite them in and say this is a gripe session. What I'd like to do is a frank conversation and dialogue. What have been your experience as a developer? What's good, what's bad, what's hard, what's easy, to get their perspective. I mentioned to Jim, we chat a little bit. One thing I don't want to have is a situation where some developers feel like I want to be there or I was left out. It's kind of hard to approach 2 or 3. Someone's going to feel like they weren't invited to the party. I don't know the best way to do that, and maybe more of a round table with some of the other committees. Maybe you can give some thought to Jim, but we're going to get to maybe setting some dates for September. Maybe we can target our first September meeting as a meeting we could invite some of those folks, Jim.
Absolutely, yes. We're happy to do so.
Okay, does that make sense to people? Any thoughts?
For the joint meeting that we're going to have with the housing ad hoc, did we want them to be at this meeting as well?
Well, I'll go back to Jim, see what you think on that. I don't know whether that's 2 separate meetings, whether we want to have one meeting where we invite a part of the meeting with the developer, attorneys or engineers, whoever we invite in, just to meet with us, or did you think it would be beneficial to have a joint meeting with a couple of the other committees and invite these same parties to that? Is there an interest from housing and the LCP to hear these same comments and concerns from the developers or their attorneys and engineers?
Right. So I think there's certainly some benefits to having a joint meeting. I will say, though, this committee is moving right along. The Housing Committee is has only had one meeting to date, so they haven't really got the ball rolling just yet. The LCP obviously is in a different direction. I think we could have a couple different opportunities here. We could bring developers, attorneys, engineers in for a frank discussion about the regulatory agreement process. We could then bring, some of the LCP members in here to have a frank discussion as a separate topic, and also, welcome them to this meeting that you guys have of that.
I was just going to say I like that. What if we were to have our meeting, invite some of these folks, and then ask if anyone from the LCP or housing would like to join us, invite them, but we won't make it an official joint meeting. If they want to have a representative attend, take note. And then maybe we have another meeting that's a joint meeting with those 2 other committees at some point. Sounds like we're moving along a little more quickly than they are, and that may make more sense. Okay. So when we get to the date setting for September, Jim, maybe we can give you a target date to invite these individuals to that meeting.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. I think the next thing I had on the agenda was E. Jim sent us, or Cynthia sent us from Jim, a summary of the printout from the E code, which was all of these zoning amendments. And Jim, I would love it if you could help explain a little bit of that to us. If nothing else, I was trying to say, okay, here's the article number and the description, but I had no idea what code in the zoning it applied to. So
Yep.
I couldn't tell you which of these is the form-based code, which is the ADU. But maybe you can explain that, and next round we'll have a little bit of sense, because I think what we'd like to do is use this as kind of the guide, and we may pick off half a dozen items, for example, the solar overlay, form-based code, as being areas that we drill down on as a committee. So I'll turn it
Perfect.
over to you to kind of explain this zoning map revisions that you sent us.
Excellent. And I will note, so you do have the full amendment since really we've gotten into E-code. So yeah, 2002 to now. Obviously, the charge, the purpose of the committee is more recent. So I'll certainly go over those just in a moment. You also have, as the chair had requested, the short-term rental ordinance or order and rationale that the town council had considered for this group's consideration as well, if you would like to further discuss that at a later meeting. So in the chart here, I think the key is just simply first, the last page, you'll see 2022. That's the year that the item was changed. So really the last page is the most recent zoning changes. So the last page being 1:6. So we have, starting from the top at 2021-010. Everybody sees that? Excellent. So these two here, 010 and 058, are very specific to individual properties that were added to the MAH district. It seemed to be very targeted for
MAH?
multifamily apartment housing, I believe is what it refers to. What I was hoping today, what we could do is I could go over kind of the big picture highlights, and then for any zoning that you would like me to have a brief presentation on, I'm happy to do that at the next meeting. So these were very targeted single lots that were added to the multifamily affordable housing district that was already in place in Hyannis and in Centerville. Well, it's the Centerville-Hyannis kind of line there. The next one, 007, 2022 007, excuse me, added the mixed-use subzone of the medical service overlay district. So that is yet another layer. This is the medical service overlay district is out behind Home Depot in the industrial park, essentially, kind of where if everyone is familiar, where the hospital was planning on going. That is where the overlay district is, and the mixed-use subzone is essentially where you see the new New England development property. So right behind Home Depot. It's not just that one property. It's an area around where that new development is at New England Development. So certainly can bring that back to the committee for further discussion if you would like. The next one is very pertinent for today. This is the expansion, 2022-034A. This is the expansion of the ground-mounted solar photovoltaic, including a 10 Wakeby. So that is, they did have an overlay. We did have an overlay district established, and we added these three parcels, which make up a 10 Wakeby. So again, I'm happy to provide an understanding of that.
Can I just pause for 1 second, Jim? So if I look back at the list, I see on page 1-5 at the very top, item 2011-006. So it looks like back in 2010 is when we first approved the use of solar overlays in the town.
Well, we established an overlay district in the town. Before that, it was simply by the Dover Amendment. So,
okay.
So it was state statute, and then we established our specific overlay district, which then we expanded upon at this one here.
Okay, so this item, there was actually a map that went with this item that showed where it was, and then, as you said, on the last page was the expansion to a very specific property on Wakeby.
Exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
How do you process these one-off requests to expand a specific overlay? How does that work?
So
you mind repeating the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so the question was, how do you process a request for an additional parcel to be added to a district? So, a request comes in, as Attorney Conley was mentioning, there's very specific entities that can request a zoning change. That's under Mass General Law 48.5. Town Council is one of them. Planning Board's one of them. Petition, as has been done in the past. And I believe maybe it's there's two other entities: the property owner and one other entity. And so, formally, it has to be submitted to the town clerk. But if a one-off wants to be added to a district, perhaps, they could make a presentation to the council. They could make a presentation to the planning board and have them consider that. And then, if the town council or the planning board wishes to move forward with that, they could direct the planning department to help them draft that. It's ultimately, you got the full group?
Councilor Turkis asked this earlier, so I had pulled it up on my phone. It took me a minute because I don't have good reception in here. But just to add to what Jim just said, he's correct. 40A, Section 5 says zoning ordinances.
Could you pull the mic just a little bit? I want to make sure that
sorry.
the recording gets it. Thank you.
Adoption or change of zoning ordinances or bylaws may be initiated by the submission to the City Council or Board of Selectmen of a proposed zoning ordinance or bylaw by a City Council, Board of Selectmen, Board of Appeals, by an individual owning land to be affected by change or adoption. sorry, I just lost it. By request of registered voters of a town pursuant to Section 10 of Chapter 39, by 10 registered voters in a city, by a planning board, by a regional planning agency, or by other methods that can be provided by a municipal charter.
Can you, what section is that in the town charter? Or what is
No,
the?
this is from the state statute, the State Zoning Act. It's quite long. It's Chapter 40A, capital A letter, and then it's Section 5, and it's got all of the procedures, who can submit the petition to begin with. That was that big, long list I just read. And then the planning board hearing, the town council hearing, the majority, the supermajority vote that's required, and all of the other things that need to be conducted, who has to get notice, and so on. It's one of the longest sections of 40A.
Thank you, Attorney Connolly.
So that gets submitted, and then if the town council wishes to move forward with it, they would go hold a hearing at the planning board, and then hold a hearing at town council, where if it could be adopted potentially. So with that, let's see. So we left off at 22034A, which was solar, and that's again adding 810 Wakeby. Certainly can provide guidance on that at our next meeting. And then the last two, while they say a lot of words, that is the downtown Hyannis zoning. So 2022144, that is the replacement of the village zoning district, which was the downtown Hyannis zoning district, and replaced it with what you now see as the downtown Hyannis zoning district. It does look a little odd because the last section, 2022146, says adding registered recreational marijuana cultivators, research facilities, and testing laboratories overlay district. What that was an allowed use already in the district, and because the downtown Hyannis zoning as it is today is a little different in that we have a use chart now. It didn't have a use chart. We separated this out and proposed it to be its overlay district because that's where it was allowed at the time. So basically, it made no substantive change from the old to the new. It's now just in an overlay district, so it stays exactly where it was and how it functioned previously.
Jim, could I ask you a question? Where is that marijuana overlay district?
So this is different. The recreational marijuana cultivators, facilities, and testing laboratories is exactly those uses. So that's a little bit different. If you're thinking about like a recreational marijuana, like a shop that you go purchase, that's prohibited in town. That's not allowed. If you were talking about medical marijuana, so we do have an overlay district for medical marijuana, and that was adopted. That's actually on the list here, but it's in the industrial district, kind of over near Forte and that area there, Barbie Ann's, that general area.
You'll have to go to Mashpee to buy your gummies, Counselor. Jim, just a couple of things. So the second to the last one, 2022-144, that's what's informally known as form-based code. Okay. Another area that I've heard from a lot of people have been the accessory dwelling units. Where is that item? What would, the first two you said were very specific to certain properties. Where's the one, and I guess I'll ask, maybe it's probably something that's still being worked out under the recent laws passed at the state level, and Attorney Connolly might have some insight here too. I'm not clear whether ADU legislation at the state level now supersedes everything the town has. I've heard some things contrary to that. I'm sure some of that's all still being worked out, but I guess I'm curious which of these sections here, Jim, is the ADU section, which is specific to areas within the town, and then any insights as to has this been superseded by the new state laws?
Right. Yeah, good point. I don't see this highlighted in here, so I'm going to need to go back and confirm where that exactly sits and why it's not reflected in the E-code. But to your point, it was recently adopted in general terms, and yes, we are comparing our local ordinance to the state new statute. My understanding is we have 180 days before it is in effect, so we are kind of weighing the two and seeing where we stand. Our initial review is There's likely some small tweaks we would need to make in order to be in compliance with the state, but we are meeting with legal to determine whether we, in fact, need to recommend to council to make those changes. One of which that we noted was we have a requirement that there's a home ownership aspect to it. The state didn't allow for that from our initial reading. And I believe there's one other aspect of it that we see as might be contradicting what the state has authorized. So we're currently looking through that and trying to provide a recommendation to council here in the short term.
Okay. The question for Attorney Connolly, thinking back to some of the comments you made on parking, other parts of the state and some of these regulations, if I understood you correctly, to the extent local ordinances don't contradict something the state has established, they don't have to mirror each other, but we just can't contradict what the state says.
That's exactly right. And Jim's correct. We've got 180 days. The ADU changes to the State Zoning Act don't take effect till February 2nd, 2025. So we have looked at our zoning ordinance, and Jim's correct. With the owner-occupied thing, we're going to have to change. We can't be less stringent, but there's tons of case law that says a municipality can be more stringent in regulating something as long as it's not inconsistent with the state statute.
So let me throw out an example. Obviously, one of the concerns here on the Cape, as well as throughout the state and the country, is housing availability. And I don't know the answer to this question, but if the state says you can have ADUs, but they don't say anything about it has to be a 12-month lease, we could, Barnstable, say because of our concerns, we don't want to have these turn into short-term rentals. We can say you have to have a minimum lease of 12 months on an ADU.
We could. That, I believe, is not one of the things that the statute covers. It says we can regulate square footage, gross floor area, the owner occupancy. There is one other, but if there's something that's not addressed, we can locally be more stringent with respect to that.
So, for example, again, as Jim pointed out, the ownership, we right now say an owner has to live in one. We may not be able to do that anymore, but we could still say you have to have at least 12 months leases so that we don't have an issue with these
Yeah,
things
we
turning
probably
into...
have leeway for that.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, I'm just trying to get a better understanding of how that works and what we can and can't do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Then, Jim, I think for our next meeting, maybe a little bit more insight as to which of the zoning, if it's not on here, where it is, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But
Absolutely.
I'll ask the committee members, any other thoughts you have for Jim? Councilor Turkelson.
So as far as the ADU issue, I haven't read for detail the new state law. The new state law removes the requirement for a homeowner to be on site.
That's my initial reading, yes.
And
yes.
how come we can't be more stringent then, if we're allowed to be more stringent by requiring the owner to be living on site?
So as Attorney Conley mentioned, you can't conflict with the ordinance either. So they have, at least in an initial reading, they've specifically stated that you cannot require home ownership on site.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Sorry, I was like, that
If they'd
wasn't
been
clear.
silent, we could put our own in, but I guess they've
Yeah,
been very...
okay. That makes total sense. Thank you.
But we will continue to look at it and provide the council with our update.
Any thoughts from Committee Member Lidek?
I'm just trying to think through, I'm sorry, thank you very much. I'm trying to think through the establishment of these overlay districts and to understand how all of that happens. So, of course, I'm very interested in the solar overlay district. How did you come up with it? What's included in it? What other overlay districts are you looking at? Because they'll have some impact on the solar overlay district. So I'm just trying to understand how do you make the decision to create an overlay district, I guess if I were to be really general about it. And then I'm presuming that you have all these maps. I don't see them here, but I'm sure you have a lot of electronic maps that describe where different overlay districts are. Then you have to decide which ones you're going to look at before you create the new district that you're trying to make, right? I'm just trying to understand that process. It's sort of a total mystery to me.
Yeah, the overlay districts are not everywhere. Overlay districts are a tool that one uses to identify a certain area without touching the baseline, the underlying zoning. So as you heard, we'll use 810 Wakeby as an example. There, the baseline zoning is residential. It's essentially 2-acre single-family housing out there. But for whatever reason, there was an initiative to look at solar at that location. So rather than remove the residential use option, it was put forward to put an overlay tool or function, so a zoning overlay, so that is another option one could consider at those specific parcels that were identified there. So yeah, on the map, it would reflect the underlying zoning, and then it would have an outline of what the overlay, and we actually, Barnstable is very convoluted in that especially if you're over behind the industrial area, we have overlay over overlay over overlay, and
Sure.
it's yeah, it's a unique tool, but it is fairly common throughout Massachusetts for communities to use those.
So if I were to make that example a little bit more complicated, let's just use the Whigby Road solar project as an example. And let's just say, because it's a big piece of land, right? 20 acres or so. Let's just say 5 acres of it has sensitive natural resources on it, and another 5 acres, I'm just making this up as I go because it's a hypothetical example, right? Let's just say a part of it has some kind of protection for the trees that are there because it protects the water district over there. So I would presume that when you're looking at establishing that overlay district, that you're looking at other things that feed into that, right? To make sure that there isn't a conflict. So you don't create the overlay district on the entire property if there are other overlay districts that would prevent you from pursuing that action there, right?
Well, for instance, you're talking about, say, a wetland that's
It's hypothetical,
let's say,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's say there's a resource running along the edge of that property. That has regulatory authority as well. So that overlay district could potentially allow the use, but it's still going to have to be X feet away from that resource area because of that requirement as well. It doesn't negate that requirement. So they have to work in tandem, and they'll have to, for instance, for that specific idea, they would have to go to both, say, the planning board and the conservation commission. We tend to have them go to conservation first, understand where you're outside of the resource area, and that's kind of your line. Your starting line is okay. You're X feet away from the resource area that you can't interrupt. Now this is your disturbance zone essentially that we can start having a conversation about. So that's how they would all kind of interplay together.
So is it fair to say that certain districts overlays have hierarchy to them?
Higher what? I didn't hear.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
So the question was, do certain zones or overlays have hierarchies? I would say not necessarily. I would say each district, each zone has its own regulation, own requirement that you must adhere to. So if you're at a property and you have an overlay district, you have an underlying zoning, you have conservation areas, each one has a requirement that you must adhere to, irrespective of each other. So, but you have to meet all those requirements for whatever development you're looking to do. So it is fairly convoluted, and that's why whenever a project comes in, we talk about the path to permitting, and it's never just, okay, go talk to the building commissioner. It's almost always go talk to the Conservation Commission, go talk to the Board of Health, go talk to Planning Department, go talk to Building, et cetera, because everyone has their own, regulations that we got to adhere to.
So what's missing for me is a strategic assessment of where it's appropriate to do certain things. That's what's missing for me. It seems like we're reacting to the need rather than actually having a strategic view of where it's appropriate to do certain kinds of activities within the town.
And I would say for some uses, I would absolutely agree with you there. Some uses, I think the town actually has a pretty good handle on where we're incentivizing growth, for instance. But you're right, there are some uses that we're reacting to, where, especially with newer technologies too, that we're trying to, get the ball rolling. But, solar is certainly one where at the state level, the goalpost seems to keep shifting as well. So we are reacting quite a bit to certain uses. I would agree with you there.
So the reason that I'm asking this is, in my activities related to environmental assessment, strategic environmental assessment, and environmental impact of certain kinds of projects, and solar, of course, is really the hot button right now. Everybody's interested in solar and other renewables. Most localities have done this kind of strategic assessment for where it's appropriate to put certain things in order to minimize their environmental impact on other natural resources that might be present on the site. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're reacting to solar. I think it's really important for us to look at it strategically and have a plan for how it would be managed going forward if something new were to come up that you hadn't planned for. A new technology, let's say, that certainly could happen. So that's the piece that's missing for me. So I'm just having a hard time with the reactive side of this, rather than, as Ken, you've been mentioning several times, the need to be more proactive and thoughtful about where and how we do certain things. And it can be described in a very positive way. To piggyback off your earlier comment from today, these are all the great places that we have which are great for ground-based solar. I'm just using that as an example. And these are places where we should avoid putting ground-based solar. And any exceptions would require some special process. So that would be another question I would have for you. Who approves the overlay district or the addition of a property, for example, to the overlay? Who approves that?
Yep, so that's under Mass General Law. So that's planning board recommendation to the council. The council doesn't have to take the planning board's recommendation, but it's ultimately the council that reviews and approves a new amendment. Real quick, I do want to plug, because it's right in line with what you're saying and what Mr. Schwab brought up early. The LCP is looking at essentially exactly that. We're finally pulling out the maps and saying, where is it appropriate for X, Y, and Z? And that's a conversation we're beginning next Thursday. And I think now is a great time to have that conversation. It would be great for this group to be there, provide guidance to that group as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have another meeting that day, so I can't make that. Too bad. I hope somebody else on the committee can go, because that would be important.
I don't want to spoil it, but there will also be a public engagement tool that you'll be able to interact with. Yes.
And snacks.
And snacks, absolutely.
Thank you very much for all that explanation.
Thank you, Kathy. Councilor Turkelson.
Thank you, Kathy. That was going to be my question about who approved it, and I thought it was the town council. I guess I'm just wondering how much advance notice in work. Charlie and I are sitting here and we're listening, and maybe we go to the LCP meeting, but how much work and outreach literally to the counselors is there? There's a lot going on in this town. I mean, I work a full-time job. This is another full-time job. So I'm realistic. Not everybody has the time or the desire or the tenacity or the interest. You kind of get your things that you like to learn about and do. I guess I'm just wondering if there's somewhere where we could be more robust in literally identifying the information that counselors need to know all the way along the process, so that it's not like on Thursday night we show up and we're like, oh my God, ground-mounted solar overlay district? Yep, I'm checking that box. Because I think, this is a real education. We have a real responsibility to our residents, and we need an education. We are not experts in planning. We're not experts in mapping. We're not experts in Mass General Law. I feel like I have a lot to learn. I'll speak for myself, that it would be my call to action is, how can we really make sure that when we're making these kinds of changes that can't be undone, at least for 2 years or maybe forever, that we're really well educated, because we are the ones that are making that decision ultimately. And I think that that's an important responsibility that we need to take, and we need the education from all of the people that we know, like, and trust. And
I would respond to that by saying absolutely. I am available to provide any education. As many of the counselors know, my door is always open. You're welcome to come in, and I'm happy to sit down with you, either whether it's weekdays, weekends, evenings. Happy to do that. Also happy to present at the council. But again, I know you guys are swamped. I mean, last night could have went to 2 a.m. if you had a full group. So.
But I guess what I'm saying is we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
So if you're getting something in your offices that you're like, you know what, 6 months from now, this is going to land on their desk, and they don't have time, like 5 days before the event, to learn about it. I'm just wondering how it is I don't know, am I not making myself clear? How do we get this information? Like, you get probably 700 emails a day. I don't need to know all 700 of them, but I'm sure there are ones that are particular to my precinct, are particular to the town, that I'm just wondering, like, where is the advance notice? We've talked about it in the document, the 3-page document that we talked about earlier, about more advance notice. I'm just wondering if we could make that advance notice of, like, you send us an email blast. This is what we're working on. This is what information you'd need to know now. Let me know if you have any questions. And, I mean, you know me. I'm probably going to be irritating you and sending you emails. And other people might not, but I would like to be better informed than less informed.
Understood.
Thanks.
I think your point is very well taken. I think there's probably a point at which in the work program of the Planning and Development Department that it's appropriate to notify you that something actually real is happening with an issue, and it's time to let everybody know that it's going on. I don't know if you have the opportunity to create some kind of, so I've seen this in other places where I've lived, where they actually have a web page which tells you all the projects that they're working on. There's probably stuff that they're working on that's not yet on that page because it's not ready for prime time, you know? I don't know if that's in your new capacity. Maybe you have an opportunity to ask the IT people to come up with something like that, where it would be available to the general public to know as well, so that, you know, all of us sitting out there trying to monitor all these things going on, because we're seeing all of it too, which activities you want to be involved in, or which you want to learn more about because they're closer to where you live or something like that.
Yeah, I guess the feeling is there's a gap from conception to reality.
Right.
And I'd like us to bridge that gap so that that learning gap can be really wide for somebody like me who doesn't have a history of planning. I'm new to government, and I really take this job seriously, and I want to be well informed. I might not be the only person asking those same questions. So it's like, can we narrow that gap, that knowledge gap, in time, space, reality too? Because again, some people are retired, some are not. So it's like, how can we filter the information so it's not like 2 days before and you're like running around town trying to figure stuff out, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'll absolutely give that some thought.
Jim, I just want to acknowledge the comments, particularly by Councilor Turkles and Councilor Bloom. Some might argue that maybe those are not particularly relevant to this specific committee, but you're hearing issues directly from the councilors that I think are important to communicate. So I'm happy to give you this opportunity to communicate those.
Yeah, but I think if we were going to be changing zoning.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
like,
I agree.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just agree. I'm happy to, yeah. I don't want to overload Jim too much on us. But yeah. So, Jim, any more thoughts on that list? I think you indicated probably the next meeting. In my naive brain, I was thinking at one point maybe we could kind of complete the regulatory agreement process and then move to zoning. But I think the reality, particularly if we have that meeting with some of the developers, maybe the first week or our first meeting in September, our next meeting, we're going to overlap a little bit, I guess is what my point is. So I guess based on what I've heard, comments from the public, things we're hearing, the committee members, if I had to say, in my mind, as we start going into zoning, clearly we're not going to review all of zoning, but the areas that jump out to me are form-based code. The solar has certainly become a big issue, particularly with the public. ADUs, it's a big item, particularly given the recent state legislation. While there is no specific zoning on STRs, it was considered. And I think in any kind of joint meeting we might have with housing and the LCPC, I think that's going to be a key issue because it goes to the whole issue of affordable housing. And I think thoughts about short-term rentals. Even housing advocates have finally begun to voice the fact that short-term rentals have an impact on affordable housing. For a long time, there was nothing really coming from that corner, but I think it's something that's important to maybe discuss. Are there any other areas? Again, I think as we get into it, there may be some others, but those are kind of hot buttons that I'm thinking at. Ken?
Yeah, I guess my simple question is, how many gyms are there to do the work? Maybe I'm speaking just because, I've been in that sort of position, and there's lots of questions, but I don't know, how big is the department? Who else is working with you on these sorts of things? Is that something that you'd like to talk about?
I appreciate that. There's nothing that's been mentioned to date is too much. We certainly can tackle that. We have a good group that does assist. No one's really working on this specific subcommittee other than myself at the moment, but we may have to bring others in if we can continue down this road. But to date, I think I appreciate everyone being very respectful of our time, and I don't see any problems with addressing these issues that you've identified.
Okay, thank you. I think, particularly in light of the fact that we have a smaller group today, there are a couple other items that I think it makes sense maybe to defer until the next meeting. Particularly, I think there's some interest on behalf of Councilors Crow and Mendez. Kate, the update on maybe some of the parking ordinance, you were looking at that court, maybe that court case, we can defer to the next meeting to maybe discuss that, if that's okay? Okay, great. I know they'll be anxious to hear. And then there was, I think you included the Chapter 59 comprehensive occupancy. Maybe we can give us an overview of that next time, so we'll defer that to the next meeting. Okay. I think that moves us to item F, which was discussion of next meeting's topics. I think we've already talked about the possibility of a joint meeting with the developers, but we're going to look to that maybe in September. We'll get to that in a minute when we talk about dates. The review of Attorney Connolly's information next time. I think, I guess maybe further discussion of some of the key items, and you're going to look at a little bit more about the ADU, Jim, for the next meeting. Other thoughts from the committee members, things that you think we ought to be looking at for our meeting next week? We've got a short window between now and then, but any thoughts you might have?
Sort of longer, perhaps this is longer term, but it was mentioned by some of the other counselors with respect to enforcement, fines. How are fines assessed? Are they ever collected? Fines, how is it structured?
Yep.
Who gets fined? When do they get fined?
I guess
What
I want to.
opportunities do you have to make corrective actions?
I was going to say, actually, I missed that one of the fifth item, which was not specifically the form-based code or solar, but would be the enforcement item, and that's probably something we'll want to ask Mr. Florence back in to talk about that. So I'd say we probably need a little bit more advance time before we put that on the agenda, so we can invite him and make sure he can come and give a little more agenda.
Future agenda.
Yeah, but we'll definitely highlight that as something we want to include in the near future. What beyond maybe an additional update from Jim, maybe another quick, I guess there's not too much really to the memo at this point on the regulatory until after we meet with the developers and get some of their perspectives. So it would be more review some of the open topics from Attorney Connolly, a little bit more overview and insight to you on some of the specific zoning, so we can then identify the key topics that we can then put on the agenda for future meetings.
Yeah, I would just be curious at some point, getting an update on the street improvements for downtown and where that stands and what our expectations of changes taking place there might be.
Maybe a Greater Streets update. I know you gave some of that last night, but maybe you'll know more by next week.
I'm happy to give an update with this group or whomever. We were going to do one at the council meeting, but unfortunately couldn't. But yeah, I'm happy to do that. There's one locked and loaded already, so can.
Great.
But
You can practice on us.
Is that the purview of this board or committee? I mean, I'm just wondering how that ties into this committee. I mean, it's nice to know, but I just don't know that it's really pertinent to our discussions.
I'm going to ask Attorney Connolly. I don't recall any of that has anything specific to do with zoning. the greater streets, or Jim, either one of you? I mean, I'm interested in hearing it. I don't know, yeah, do we want to go too far afield? Maybe just an update for general knowledge, but it may not be anything we can, any thoughts?
That would be fine. I need to know more about it to tell you whether it falls in, but it's not zoning enforcement.
All right,
Regulatory purposes, probably outside,
okay.
but I don't see it in our present.
Yeah, maybe we have, since it sounds like we might have a fairly light agenda next meeting anyways, just a update? Committee okay with that? Sure. Councilor Turkelson?
Yeah, I mean, I know he's going to provide it at the town council meeting,
Yeah.
so I guess in an effort to like utilize time well, I'm just not sure that it is applicable to this committee, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm only one of some of us up here.
1 of 5 today. I'm going to ask, if you wouldn't mind, just, maybe not the full-blown presentation, but just general knowledge. I'm thinking that may have some thoughts, as we get into some of the form-based code, just. I'm also going to ask Mr. Etienne, although you're here as a member of the public, you'll be joining us on the dais next week, hopefully. You've been giving some thought to this. Do you have any things that, on your mind that you think we're beginning to transition into the zoning? Any hot buttons you have that you might like us to think about?
Any hot buttons? Not exactly.
I think you should try to come to the
Yeah, maybe just come up
microphone.
here. Thank you.
Push. There you go. Excellent. Any hot button topics? Not exactly. Today, I was just being an observer in the crowd, just really taking in all the information, being updated on what's going on, and making sure that for next week, being educated, as Councilwoman Turkelson said earlier, just the gap in at least my background and my knowledge and like what's going on. That takes time and effort and study, and to truly understand what's going on and who's being affected, such as Ms. Salas earlier in her letter, and all the things that I jotted down from her letter and all the facts that I would like to verify and fact check, and truly go into each and every single aspect of industrial scale solar installations or offshore wind substations, and the impact that, yes, there's a general goal of just getting renewable energy, but what are the benefits? What are the risks that need to be considered? Who's going to be affected? Who stands to benefit from that, and why? Especially when it comes to even the street design, I wonder who's going to be affected by that. I mean, me, myself being a teacher, and kids coming to school, going to school, or going home from school, how are they even getting there? Why are they late? Is it because they didn't have transportation? Or is it just unsafe for them to walk from home to school? Like, just simple transportation aspects. I mean, that's outside the purview of this committee, but a lot of details to peruse and just go after.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Well, we look forward to you joining us next week. Okay. Yes, Commissioner Turkelson.
Kate, do you think by next week you'll be able to bring us a little bit more up to speed on the Wakeby project with you and Jim kind of bringing us up to speed about what the reality is going forward on that project, just because, again, it's so time sensitive?
Yes, I can certainly do that. I did collect a lot of materials yesterday when I started seeing the emails, and I am familiar with what happened with the litigation, but I'll certainly talk with Jim, and I can give you more information next time.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I think we got a general agenda. I'll work on that to get that out early next week. I think the next item is approval of the minutes for July 26, 24. Cynthia sent those out. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye, approved. I think the next thing, the final thing would be just to talk about dates for our next meeting. I spoke with Sarah beforehand. It seems like Fridays, this time frame seems to work well for everybody, or the majority up until now, although we do have a few people who are not here today. I know one at least was traveling. I guess looking at the calendar, if we were to go 2 weeks out from the 23rd of August, that would make Friday, August 6th. And if we skip a week, September 6th, and then if we were to skip 1 week, we'd be looking at Friday, September 20th. How does that look for folks right now?
Is that good for you, Seth?
Yes. So the 6th and the 20th? Yes.
Okay.
Works for me.
Looks good.
Seth, is the 3 PM timeframe workable for you, 3 to 5?
That would be difficult. We shift that about a half hour later for the idea.
I think we need to look at the coverage of,
Yeah. Sarah, I'm not sure if you heard that. If we were to move the meeting to 3:30 on Friday the 6th and Friday the 20th of September, it looks like you have staff available till 6, but would that work if we were to make sure we were cut off by 6, if not 5:30?
Yeah, 5:30 would be preferred, but 6 o'clock is fine. Thank you.
I'll do my best to knock it off by 5:30. Okay, why don't we plan on that? We'll look at Friday, September 6th, Friday, September 20th, 3:30 for our next meetings. Jim and Kate, how does that look for you? Should ask you as well? Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you. Same for the 20th.
Same
We'll
for
do
the
it
20th, 3:30.
Yeah,
I'm
3:30.
fine with 3:30. It's
Okay.
fine.
All right. And unless there's any other comments from the committee members, do you have a motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.